Kind of the idea that, yeah, you're going to be my guest to the sense that you don't get to leave unless I tell you you can leave, and we're going to keep you here to keep the rest of your nation pacified. Um, because if they, if I can't trust you in Jerusalem, I'll put you right here in Susa where I can keep a close eye on you. It's interesting too that in this account that even Ezra writes of this fellow as Jeconiah. Okay, we also know him as Jehoiakim. He there These kings sort of had two names typically. They would have sort of a family name, and they would have a royal name. Okay, so they would have the family name would have been Jeconiah, and the royal name would have been Jehoiakim. All right, but he's always referred to, almost always, other than the Book of Kings, he's almost always referred to as Jeconiah. And if we remember, I forgot to look it up. I beg your pardon. I did forget to look it up. If you get a chance, try and look it up. I think it's in the book of Jeremiah, where God, speaking through Jeremiah, describes Jehoiakim or Jeconiah, and basically Coniah. I think it's even abbreviates it even further. It goes to a diminutive form of Coniah. So it could be like, here is this king, King James. Well, I'm going to, but his family name is James, and I'm just going to call him Jimmy. That's what God is basically saying about Jeconiah. I just called him Coniah, and basically saying, he says something to the effect that if he was a ring on my finger, I'd pull him off and throw it away. God had absolutely no use for Jeconiah. That was the line of that. That was the line of that discussion. That apparently Jehoiakim was so, I don't know if he was sinful, if he was incompetent, or both, perhaps. But there was something about him that God basically just said, this guy's useless. And if he was, like I said, if he was a ring on my finger, I'd pull him off and throw him away. And so it's, again, interesting to know here in the book of Chronicles that he's referred to in his family name rather than his royal name, as if even in this list, we're not going to acknowledge him as king. We're just going to acknowledge that, yes, he existed. We're not going to acknowledge him as king. We see that David's list of descendants goes on through verse 24, with the last one mentioned, which is Ananiah. And this, therefore, puts something of the date stamp on this writing, because we can get a pretty good idea of when this last fellow, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Anani, we got a pretty good idea of when he lived, roughly 400, 430 BC, roughly in that time frame, and therefore we got some idea of when this book was written, because had there been subsequent generations, it would have been logical for the writer to have noted those later generations. So again, here in this account, what do we see though? We see that David's descendants being listed and noting which ones were born in Hebron versus which ones were born in Jerusalem, and noting that he reigned in Hebron 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned for 33 years. So his entire reign was 40 years and 6 months, one of the longer reigning kings, and again establishing for these Jews the legitimacy of David's throne, as they are looking forward to that fulfillment of prophecy, and that would be coming from the Messiah. We go then to chapter 4. Like I said, I'm not going to read all these genealogies to you. That would be just incredible to us, and they lose a lot of meaning, because we're 20 or nearly 3,000 years removed from, or 2,500 years removed from these lists, and so they don't mean much to us. But to the Jews of this day, they meant a great deal. Um, Now the writer turns his attention to the tribes of Judah, or to the lineage of Judah. Again, this is why this is the lineage of the Messiah. This is the lineage of David, and so now he's going to kind of back up and make sure that he captures all of that, paying particular attention to two of his sons, namely Perez and Shelah. He adds a little bit of commentary to the lineage. We see in verse 9, for example, here is Jabez. The sons of Judah, well, I'll back up. Sons of Judah, verse 1, were Perez, Hezron, Carmi, Hur, and Shobal. And he goes on then to discuss the lineages, particularly of Perez and of Shelah. But we find it this interesting commentary, sort of a side comment, if you will, in verse 9. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother named him Jabez, because I bore him with pain. Now Jabez called on the Lord of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, that it may not pain me." And God granted him what he requested. An interesting side comment here. We know nothing about Jabez other than what we read right here. He's not mentioned in any of the other books of the Old Testament. He's in that lineage of Judah, of course. He's mentioned as this son of sorrow or son of pain because his mother, probably because she had pain in childbirth, is the speculation. There may have been some other reason that he's described as the son of sorrow or the son of pain, but it's more likely that. But he prays to God that further pain and sorrow would be kept from him. And God granted that request, so this man became, as it says, more honorable than his brothers. Like I said, this man is mentioned nowhere else in the Old Testament, nowhere else in the Bible. And so this story does suggest that this account and this prayer were known to the Jews. And it is, I think, an attempt by the writer to really show the power of prayer, the power of faith. He constantly is injecting that kind of exhortation into his writings, trying to encourage these folks. Now then, in the next part of chapter 4, starting in verse 11, is getting into the lineage of Simeon, and probably simply because the lineage of Simeon, this tribe's land was directly adjacent to that of Judah. A lot of interaction between Judah and Simeon, to the point that Simeon, the tribe of Simeon had nearly disappeared. It had nearly vanished. And we note, especially because of intermarriage with the tribe of Judah, but we note especially the comment added by the writer in verse 27 on this, where he says, now Shimei had 16 sons and 6 daughters, but his brothers did not have many sons, nor did all their family multiply like the sons of Judah. For whatever reason, this tribe just simply wasn't producing sons. They were producing daughters, apparently, but not sons. And so they would intermarry with the tribe of Judah, and to the point that, to a large extent, that tribe of Simeon had nearly disappeared. We may recall, if we go back to Genesis and look there in verse 4, in chapter 49, about Simeon, and we will find there that Ah, there it is. Verse 5, yeah. Simeon and Levi are brothers, their swords of implements of violence, that my soul not enter their castles, let their glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, in their self-control they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger. But he also says somewhere else, he says that they would not have preeminence. He says that they would not predominate in the family. I'm trying to think of where I saw that. I looked at it earlier, and now I can't remember where I saw it. But he does say that about Simeon, and certainly that came to be. That came to pass. The tribe of Simeon ultimately is virtually entirely absorbed by the tribe of Judah. Um, but as this account in Chronicles points out, um, uh, verse 24 and on, they uh, verse 39, they went to the entrance of Gedor, even to the west side of the valley, to seek pasture for their flocks. They found rich and good pasture, and the land was broad and quiet and peaceful, for these who lived there formerly were Hamites. Therefore, recorded by name, came in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and attacked their tents, and the Meunites who were found there, and destroyed them utterly to this day, and lived in their place, because there was pasture there for their flocks. So this is a tribe of predominantly shepherds with flocks and with their flocks, and they would drive out these Meunites as described here, and then they would also, in verse 43, they destroyed the remnant of the Amalekites who escaped and have lived there to this day. So at one time, this would have been a fairly significant tribe in terms of what they were able to accomplish with their warriors, their fighting men, driving out these two other groups, and especially putting an end, apparently, to the Amalekite threat, which had been a trouble to Israel throughout their history, or for a long time in their history. And yet, again, we find that in the end, they end up getting absorbed, if you will, into the rest of the nation through Judah. We go from there then into chapter 5, and now the writer turns his attention to what we call the Transjordan tribes of Israel. Now we're dealing with Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. If you recall, these tribes, these groups, were given land on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, so they lived on the east bank of the Jordan, as the nation of Israel, or as the children of Israel, had crossed the Jordan and come into Canaan. These tribes had been given land on the east bank, and it stayed over there. Reuben, of course, was the eldest son of Jacob, should have had the leadership role. But recall, as it is mentioned here, now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he is not enrolled in the genealogy according to his birthright. And so it's interesting that the writer of Chronicles feels the need to inject this extra comment. We find this, of course, repeating what is already found over in Genesis. If we look at Genesis 35, we find the account of the event that is mentioned here. 35 and verse 22, it came about that while Israel was dwelling in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. So here was Judah having a sexual relation with one of Israel's concubines, which was forbidden or not allowed. And Judah, and then rather Israel, speaks of this later on in chapter 49. In verse 3, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, He went up to my couch. And so here is Israel giving that pronouncement against Reuben, and so Reuben does not get to have the right of the firstborn. That right of the firstborn passed to Joseph and to Joseph's sons Manasseh and Ephraim. Huh? That was what? It did what? Defiled his father's bed? I don't know anybody in your kinfolk that would have done that. Well, I don't want to know your I don't know your family dirty laundry. Well, the genealogy part would have been here is Reuben, who goes and has a relationship with his father's wife. Context with you would be a half brother. Yeah. John said that. There would be, it would be it'd be like as if a woman would have a sexual relationship with her stepson, or something like that, and that would produce some child. Yes. Yeah, I think it would be like it would result perhaps in a half brother to the rest of them. Yeah, there is no indication that Reuben had a child with Bilhah, so we don't know that there was any offspring to deal about. But he did have apparently a sexual relationship with this woman, and like I said, Israel learned of it, uh, and condemned Reuben because of it. Again, we realize these men of the tribe of Israel, they were living on that eastern border of Israel. They were living on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And so they were frequently bordering the surrounding tribes. They had the Edomites over there. They had the Moabites over there. They had what? That he had sex with his stepmother, in effect, or it would be like a sex with his stepmother in a sense. He had a sexual relationship with his stepmother, and as far as we know, didn't produce any offspring from that union. But yeah, he went into his father's wife, or his father's concubine, but in effect, a wife, one of his father's wives, and had a sexual relationship with her. And so, yeah, it'd be like a man who would go into his stepmother and have a sexual relationship with her. And I'm sure that's not the only time in history that's ever happened, but it was enough for Israel to call him out on it and deny him the birthright. Yeah. That's true. That's true. There is that event in Corinthians where uh huh, yeah, by his daughter-in-law, correct. She's pointing out that we also know Judah had a child with Tamar, who was his daughter-in-law. Tamar had been married to Judah's son, and when the son died, then of course, they ultimately ended up having Judah and Tamar ended up having a sexual relationship and producing children. In fact, these ones that were being named earlier, Perez was one of those children, as I recall. But again, these tribes, Reuben and Gad, and a half tribe of Manasseh, because Manasseh was split in half by the Jordan River. Part of them on the west bank of the Jordan River, part of them on the east bank of Jordan River, and they were frequently battling with the surrounding tribes. Again, the Moabites, the Edomites, and the other nations that lived in that area. And so they were apparently fairly prominent fighting men. We see that in Joshua 4 and verse 12, they send 40,000 men to fight with Joshua as he's leading the rest of the Israelites in the conquest of Canaan. And later, they were able to send 44,760 into a battle. It's interesting, too, again, that the commentator, the writer injects some comments in here. For example, in verse 20, he points out the sons of Reuben. This is verse 18. The sons of Reuben and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, consisting of valiant men who bore shield and sword and shot with bow and were skillful in battle, were 44,760 who went to war. They made war against the Hagarites, Jetur, Naphish, and Nodab. They were helped against them, and the Hagarites and all who were with them were given into their hand, for they cried out to God in the battle, and he answered their prayers because they trusted in him. Notice that comment from Ezra. Here are these tribes that are battling this group of Haggites. I don't know who exactly the Hagarites. I'm not sure exactly who they were, but they noticed that they called out to the Lord. They took away their cattle. And talks about all the spoil they take, and then they go on in verse 23. Now the sons of the half tribe of Manasseh lived in the land from Bashan to Baal Hermon, and these are the heads of their fathers, and so forth. But now notice the comment in verse 25. Notice the verse comment, but, and this is obviously a big issue here, and this is thought that I think the commentator is trying to drive home. As these Jews coming back are starting to think about what happened in their history, here's Ezra to remind them, hey, as long as we called out to God, as long as we put our trust in God, as long as we offered our prayers to God, we were we were successful. We were victorious. We did well. We prospered. Is what but verse 25, but they acted treacherously against God. Oops. They acted treacherously against God, the God of their fathers, and played the harlot after the gods of the peoples of the land, whom God had destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, even the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away into exile, namely the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to Halal, Heber, Hara, and to the river of Gozan to this day, which apparently they were still living there after having been carried off into captivity. Why are these tribes not well represented in the nation of Israel that's trying to come back together? Well, here's why. He says they played the harlot. We may recall, it's interesting to kind of to think of the history of this line. If you think about the account over in Joshua 22, do you remember this account back? I'm sure y'all remember when we studied Joshua several years, maybe decades ago. I remember that study. It was a pretty good study, I thought. Even if I do say so myself. But in Joshua 22, starting in verse 10, if you remember what happened there, when they came, this is after they've sort of begun to settle the land. They've started to drive out these other groups, and they're starting to settle the land. And now we have this situation that comes up. When they came to the region of the Jordan, which is the land of Canaan, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a large altar in appearance. You remember this account? So as the army is beginning to break up and go back to their tribal homelands, these three groups, this tribe of Gad, tribe of Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they gather there on the Jordan and they build this large altar. And the sons of Israel heard it and said, behold, the sons of Reuben and sons of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh, have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region of Jordan, on the side belonging to the sons of Israel. When the sons of Israel heard it, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel gathered themselves to Shiloh to go up against them in war. They thought they were going to try and split off. They thought they were going to try and offend God by setting up yet another place of worship apart from the one God had given them. Remember that account here in Joshua? And that was the concern. What's going on? Haven't we had enough trouble? They had seen what had happened with the sin of Achan. They had seen some of the other destruction that had come upon them because of disobeying God. And now here we've got this group from Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh, and they're building a separate altar, and we're going to get in trouble with God again. And so they're prepared to go to war. They're prepared to go to war, and even to stop this. They even go to them and say, verse 16, what is this unfaithful act which you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away from following the Lord this day by building yourselves an altar to rebel against the Lord this day? Is it not the iniquity of Peor enough for us, by which we have not cleansed ourselves to this day, although a plague came on the congregation of the Lord, that you must turn away from the Lord turn away this day from following the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. There you go. They're afraid. They're afraid of what's going to happen out of this. Or did not Achan, the son of Zerah, verse 20, act unfaithfully in all the things of the band, and the wrath fell upon the whole congregation of Israel. And that man did not perish alone in his iniquity. Hey, this thing you're doing, you're going to get us all in trouble, is what they're trying to say here. And they even go back as far as to say, verse 19, if however the land of your possession is unclean, then cross over to the land of the possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take possession among us. In other words, if the land east of the Jordan isn't acceptable to you, come over to the west side and we'll give you land. We'll make it right. They're willing to even go that far. But of course we see what happens here. What the answer is. Verse 21, then the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh answered and spoke to the heads of the families of Israel, oh, the mighty one, God, the Lord of it, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and may Israel know itself, if it was rebellion or if it was an unfaithful act against the Lord, do not save us this day. If we have built this altar to turn away from following the Lord, or to offer a burnt offering or grain offering on it, or to sacrifices of peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself require it. But truly we have done this out of concern for a reason, saying, in time to come, your sons may say to our sons, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? In other words, they had set up this altar, if you recall the story, they had set up this altar as a memorial to their sons to remind them, you're still a part of Israel. Yes, you're living on the east side of the Jordan. That doesn't matter. You're still a part of Israel. You're still part and parcel of this group. And you continue to worship with the rest of Israel. And it's kind of interesting that the founders, basically the founders of this tribe, or the initial leaders of this tribe in the days of Joshua, had that profound concern to keep their sons faithful to God, even to the point of setting up this other altar as a memorial to keep their sons faithful to God. And yet, again, we read in Chronicles, they forsook God. They played the harlot. It says they acted treacherously against God, played the harlot, went off after other gods, and therefore were carried away by the Assyrians. And it just, again, I think it's kind of an underscore on the part of on the part of Ezra to point out this is what this is what happens to a tribe that fails to stay faithful to God. All right, from there, then we go to chapter 6, and now we're going to deal with the Levite lineage. That's the focus of that. And of course, this would have been extremely important to the Jews because, again, they're trying to reestablish their religion. Well, they can't really reestablish their religion unless they know who the Levites are, because the Levites are the ones that run the religious services. And so as they're trying to get their religious services rebuilt and establish the priest, who gets to call himself a priest? Who gets to be participating in the burnt offerings and in the incense offerings and in the and take on the role as the high priest? Who gets to do that? How do we be sure we're following God? Well, so the lineage here of the Levites was critical to them. We see, as we start off here, the sons of Levi were Gershom, Korath, and Merari, and the sons of Korath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel, and the children of Amram were Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. Well, so now you've got Levi to Kozath to Amram, and then to Moses. And so clearly we're skipping over several generations here, because we know that the Israelites were in Egypt for over 400 years. That's out of Exodus 12 and verse 40. So we know they were there some 430 years. And so there would have been other generations in between here. And so we understand that this is sort of an abbreviated list that Ezra is giving us. We note that as he lists through here, he lists in verse 10, and Johanan became the father of Azariah. It was he who served as priest in the house which Solomon built in Jerusalem. Again, a little parenthetical statement inserted in to show that, hey, we're going to establish this linkage between the house of the temple of Solomon and the fellow who was officiating there, so that we can establish that lineage of who's been doing what and reestablish it. This line then is traced forward to Hilkiah. Down in verse 13, there's Hilkiah. We remember Hilkiah during the reign of Hezekiah was part of that reformer who tried to reestablish the worship of God. And then the line is traced forward then all the way down to Jehozadak, who was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. As it said here in verse 15, Jehozadak went along with the Lord, went along when the Lord carried Judah and Jerusalem away into exile by Nebuchadnezzar. It's likely that the Jews of this time, when Ezra's writing this, that they know of Jehozadak and his lineage. This would have been, again, some 70 years before, and so they likely know of this man, or at least of his family line, and though therefore it would help establish for them the legitimacy of the priesthood coming through that family line. The rest, I'm going to stop there. I got some more to talk about in 1 Chronicles 6, but I'm going to stop there, and we'll pick up the rest of this next week. I appreciate your attention this morning, and hopefully by the end of next week we'll get out of these genealogies and a little bit more into some of the history. But I appreciate your patience this morning. Thank you.